How much do you need to retire this year? In fact, if you Google how much do I need to retire, there's going to be almost 2 billion results. And I'm pretty sure that's the definition of finding a needle in a haystack. And what I've personally found is that there's all these different answers out there and it ends up confusing people and leaving us feeling like we'll never have enough. And unfortunately, this can lead us to working longer and delaying happiness, even though we might already be in a financial position to retire early. And someone called me the other day and they found an article that I thought was actually pretty well researched and pretty well put together. And the research found that you should only live on 3% of your nest egg, especially if you're going to retire early. And that is now going to be the new safe withdrawal rate for early retirement. So after they sent me the article, they asked, is this true? Is 3% what I should use for my early retirement? Because if that's the case, that would mean maybe they need to keep working and saving more, really more than they originally thought they needed. So today I'm going to share with you the same framework that I shared with them, and I'm going to explain why using essentially a rule of thumb like a 4% or a 3% static withdrawal rate is good for back of the napkin math, but basing your entire retirement on a rule of thumb, in my opinion, is really a recipe for disaster. And then lastly, I'll show you why you might actually need less than you think by using the framework and the research that I'm going to teach you today. Hey everyone, I do want to let you know that my firm is taking on new clients this year. And as you may know, we specialize in working with people in retirement or planning to retire early who have saved over $1 million and they want to save on taxes in retirement. And right now we're offering a free retirement analysis. So if you're on the hunt for a financial planner and you think we have the right expertise to help, go ahead and click the link in the description below. And on that page, you can schedule a call directly with my firm. Without further ado, let's get back into the video. So let's talk about why back of the napkin rules of thumb, they might be holding you back from retiring early. And we're going to start with one of the most common rules of thumb out there, the one that you're going to read all over the internet, and that's going to be the 4% rule. Now, the 4% rule has long been considered a safe withdrawal rate, and that was after a study that was first published in the 90s that basically what it did was backtest all these various different historical market scenarios, and it found that over a 30-year retirement period with a balanced portfolio of, that said, 50% broad market stock and 50% broad market bonds, that essentially a 4% portfolio withdrawal rate had the highest success rate of not running out of money. And this seemed to be a good option for essentially the traditional retiree who wanted to retire in their late 60s. And like I mentioned, this is one of those rules of thumb that was honestly pretty helpful when retirement planning first started. And I think it was really the best research we had at the time. And I'm not knocking it completely. It's still a good start today, at least conceptually, when you start to think about how you will plan out your retirement. But the subsequent research has since improved since the 90s. And I personally believe that a static 4% or 3% rule might not be the most optimal strategy for someone who wants to retire at, let's say, 50 or even 55. And the reason is that it's lacking some really important variables that, without accounting for these variables, I believe they might leave you working longer than you need to, and maybe even thinking that you need a much larger portfolio balance in order to retire early. So let's talk about the first variable that we need to think about. And for most folks that want to head into early retirement, this is going to be obvious, but it's something that a rule of thumb doesn't necessarily account for. And what I mean by that is the research out there has basically treated retirement income as entirely funded by portfolio withdrawals. Now, why can that be a problem? Well, I believe that most of us, especially those of you watching this, that might not be very realistic. Why? Because obviously people will have income from Social Security, pensions, rental properties, part-time income, and inheritances. And those factors can make the cash flow picture for most families a little bit more complex. A portfolio withdrawal strategy, or figuring out how much you need to retire, should also consider other sources of income in retirement, as well as the timing of those income sources, because that can impact the size of the portfolio you need to cover your spending. For example, let's look at a couple, not real names, of course, but here is Mary and John. And the hatchet thing that you're looking at right here is basically all their income sources over their lifetimes. This is a retirement income software that we use for clients that follows a research-based guardrails. And as we can see, they're working till around 2028. They're both going to be age 55 at that point, and that's when they really want to officially retire. Now, here's why I think a rule of thumb would be inefficient. We can see that initial withdrawal period, the initial period here, that black section right there, their retirement is going to be fully funded by portfolio withdrawals. But as we continue to move along in life, eventually we're going to have Social Security to eventually, replace some of that. That's going to be that yellow and purple sections right here. In their case, the initial withdrawal capacity is actually higher. It's closer to 5% of the portfolio each year, assuming we are invested properly, of course, and we have the right accounts in place. We're also willing to be dynamic, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in later this video because it's very important. And again, that's 5% we can spend if that's what they need to live on to support their lifestyle. And that can be totally fine because we know that these other income sources like Social Security are yet to come. So again, this picture is factoring in those other income sources, and the software is adjusting for higher spending when they initially retire, because we know that withdrawal won't be needed to be that high in the future. So with traditional planning and relying on the 4% rule, it might lead you to think you need to continue to work in order to retire early, when it turns out you don't need additional money to retire. You just need a plan that accounts for all your income sources. The second reason I find that using a rule of thumb withdrawal rate might not be the most optimal planning tool for you is that it's not dynamic and it can neglect market volatility. So I want you to imagine two people and they're going to have the same exact portfolio allocation, but one retires this year. And at that time, let's say their total portfolio value is $2 million. The simple math behind the 4% rule would mean they could start taking $80,000 per year, and they're going to continue to adjust for inflation each year as they go through retirement. But let's say person number two, again, with that same exact portfolio allocation, they decide to retire 6 months later. And unfortunately, that portfolio balance is going to drop 25% due to a recession. And that balance is now at $1.5 million because of the market drop, of course. You don't always get to choose what markets will do after you retire, and the 4% rule would suggest they start to take $20,000 less, which is at $60,000 per year. So does it make sense that person one can spend $80,000 per year throughout retirement, and person two can only spend $60,000? And again, they both have the same exact portfolio, but they just have different retirement dates that are separated by 6 months essentially. Just person number one, who is taking $80,000 per year, who just saw their portfolio drop as well, their portfolio just dropped 25% as well. Do they feel comfortable taking $80,000 out? And is person two now safe because they started taking withdrawals after the market already dropped? I'm not sure about you, but I wouldn't want to base my retirement confidence on what the market does shortly after I retire. And then I'm locked into a static rule of thumb. And my personal opinion is that a dynamic approach can be much better. And my last point is that your expenses will change the day you retire and also as you go through retirement. Inflation is a factor you want to account for when planning out retirement. However, despite the simplicity of assuming that your expenses continue to go up with inflation over your lifetime, retirement research has increasingly shown something pretty interesting here. The research has shown that retirees actually experience a decline in real spending through their retirements. As early as the go-go years, the transition to less active slow-go years, and finally wind down to the series of no-go years with very little discretionary spending. And this is often called the retirement smile. This overall decline in spending due to the smile can further alleviate the stress that would be placed on a portfolio relative to what is assumed by using a static withdrawal rate. So what this means that traditional research may be somewhat overestimating the amount of funds you'll need to retire on in the first place. And if we expect lower average spending across your retirement years, it means you may not need quite as much to retire as you think. This is where having a financial plan that is dynamic and adapts as your life changes, accounting for expenses, longevity, market drops, can really give you the confidence you need to retire early. And I say this all the time, but financial planning is not a one and done solution where I go ahead and print out a 1,000-page book book and you just put your head down and hope that life doesn't change. What it really is an ongoing process where you need to make key adjustments along the way. And those adjustments are what will help you retire early and retire successfully. So let's talk about how much you need to retire early this year. And again, we need to take this one step further and not start with how much you have in a portfolio, because as we saw, there are lots of other variables at play. And the first place to start is to figure out what you want to spend your time doing and how much will that cost. What I mean by that is we want to take into account what you expect to spend, and from there we can sort of reverse engineer what you actually need. For example, are you going into retirement with a mortgage? If so, when will that be paid off? Because your expenses are going to change. How much do you want to spend on travel? Do we have a grip, like a really good grip on what your expenses will be? Because you don't exactly need to get down to every single penny, but you want to start here so we can put together a little bit deeper of a plan here. So let's take a look at an example of a couple here. Let's call them Jack and Jill, and they're both age 55. Let's say they want to spend $10,000 per month after taxes. So how much do they need a portfolio to cover that? So let's go through a simple example here. Okay, so first let's look at what, in my opinion, is the wrong starting place when we're getting down to some specifics here. Now, using a simple 4% rule, that would assume they would need $3 million, again, to make that $10,000 per month at $120,000 per year. Divide that by 4%. That's how I got that number. And again, this is problematic because it ignores a lot of other variables out there. So let's go a little bit deeper, and let's also assume that Jill has a pension of around $4,000 per month. If we do some math here, that would mean we have a shortfall of $6,000 per month that we need to make up for somewhere else. Okay, now we're getting close to what we need here. But what if we're more dynamic and we're willing to take a dynamic approach to the way we want to spend, which is basically a fancy way of saying when markets are good, we give ourselves a little bit of a bonus, and when markets are bad, when, not if, we tighten the belt a little bit. And we follow a systematic process for that approach. And the guardrails research has shown that we can actually take more than 4% if we use a dynamic approach. So let's start with the assumption. So $6,000 per month is the shortfall. We can annualize that and divide that by, let's say, 5%. That means we need around $1.4 million. And we probably want to gross that up a little bit for taxes as well, depending on how much you have in tax deferred accounts. Now, you may not have that, or you may have more than that, and you want to spend even more than $10,000 a month, but that's where you can start seeing what additional income I can make if I'm working part-time and working that job to help make the shortfall even smaller. For example, let's say John found a part-time job that doesn't pay as much compared to his current job, but he's more than okay with this because it's less stressful and it's actually something that could be pretty enjoyable. And then we assume John can make an additional $2,000 after tax per month. That makes the portfolio needed to be around $1 million. And hopefully you start to see how this all works together. And my main point is that your portfolio balance is not a magic number you need to hit. It's more of a tool to supplement your income and your lifestyle. Because if you have other income sources, we can see that you need a much smaller portfolio. Now, doing that exercise can help you understand how much on paper you need today, but because we know that tax policies change, your spending is going to change throughout retirement, investment markets, inflation, interest rates, you've probably heard all this before, but we want to be able to have a plan that is constantly adapting for those changes and adjusting as you change course. So because we can't predict the future, our approach with our clients is to, number one, start with your financial plan. What is the current trend of your retirement? And we can model out different scenarios to ultimately see the outcome. You know, how long does your money last? And also from there, we can see how can we maximize spending. And sometimes we test what ifs to see what an impact of, for let's say, part-time work will look like, or even if there were a major health event. Finding out how much you need to factor in for other income sources is, in my opinion, a way better starting point than the 4% rule. But we want your strategy to take into account all your income, how old you are, your expenses, your total net worth, even your estate plan and your legacy goals. You know, how much do you want to leave to your heirs? Because that really does matter too, especially for a lot of the clients that we work with. And from there, we can even take it one step further and say, you know what does the research say I can spend, and how would that play out even during the worst financial periods during history? So again, I don't want you to just be able to retire early on paper. I want you to have a ton of confidence going into it. So don't start with, I need $2 million so I can spend over $6,000 per month, or I need $3 million so I can spend $10,000 per month. Start in the opposite direction with your expenses and your income sources that will be there. And perhaps it means working a job that you love, even if it pays less. Again, start with what you want your life to look like and use your portfolio as a tool to get there. Although I do think the 4% rule can be pretty suboptimal to base your retirement plan on. The other day I heard Dave Ramsey on a show, bless his heart, he mentioned that actually you should be able to take 8% as far as a static withdrawal rate. And I was sort of floored when I heard that. And I was surprised, why would he make such a blanket statement like that? So I made a video on why I think Dave Ramsey is wrong to recommend an 8% withdrawal rate. And I actually went into further detail on how our early retirement withdrawal strategy goes and the research behind it in that video. So check that out by clicking right here. Once again, this is Matt. I'm a certified financial planner and advisor over at 1 Degree Advisors. If you'd like to talk to me or someone on my team about your early retirement plan, you can click the link in the description and we can chat with you. Again, we're offering an early retirement analysis for free for you. Thanks for watching.